Good afternoon and welcome to this installment of Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships here at Epic, and I'll be your host again for today's call. We thank you for joining us for a presentation from Patrick Delaney, VP of Retirement Insights at T. Rowe Price. Patrick is the Retirement Insights leader for T. Rowe Price's U.S. intermediary business and is a Vice President of T. Rowe Price Investment Services. In his current role, he plays a key part in developing the firm's point of view and position on major topics and issues that impact the retirement industry, including plan design, demographic trends, sponsor and participant target date utilization, investment selection, and financial wellness. He is a frequent speaker at client and industry events, and he serves as a retirement SME to record keepers, consultants, advisors, TPAs, and plan sponsors. Patrick is with us to share T. Rowe's insights and thought leadership pertaining to auto features and target date funds. It's no secret to anyone on the call that given the inertia we see with plan participants and the subsequent assets flowing into target date funds, that these topics are pretty critical to the successful retirement of millions of Americans. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Patrick Delaney, and we will listen to what he has to say and field questions at the end. For those who have them, please enter those into the GoToWebinar question panel there. Patrick, take it away.
All righty, thank you, Brian. Thanks all for hopping on this afternoon. We're just going to hop right into it here since we've got about a half hour or so. As Brian said, we're going to discuss three things. Trends that we're seeing from both a sponsor and participant standpoint with respect to the adoption and utilization of auto services, what the target date experience has been for participants in the retirement space. I think even though we've enjoyed kind of 8+ years of a great bull run, with target date funds garnering most of the contributions, and projected to be going toward the end of the decade, I think we all owe it to ourselves, and certainly at T. Rowe Price as a target date leader, we are constantly testing ourselves to make sure that these investment vehicles are benefiting participants. And then we'll take a look at the end, changing demographic landscape. We kind of have what I like to call a barbell going on in the American workforce. And on the front end, you've got 76 million baby boomers have started hitting age 65 and exiting the workforce, and on the back end, you've got 80 million millennials that are now entering the workforce, and actually, as of October of 2015, are the most populous demographic in the workforce. So we'll take a look at those trends and how that's playing out in the retirement space. So let's jump into auto services. We certainly would advocate that you use them in a continuum or in conjunction with one another. I think auto enrollment is just the starting point, and then there are certain things that you can do throughout participants' time in the retirement system to not only get them in the plan, but make sure that they're saving more, make sure that they're in an age-appropriate asset allocation solution. So we'll go through a couple of these bullet points and talk about the benefits of each. So we know that obviously they work. If you look at the percentages on this slide here, they are benefiting the vast majority of participants who get enrolled, who are re-enrolled, who are having their deferrals increase gradually over time. These percentages are not 33%, 44%, but you're looking at 96, 76, 83. So again, benefiting the vast majority of participants that are interacting with them. So we'll start with kind of the usual suspect of auto enrollment. And you see that the top chart on the left-hand side is the deferral percentage. I think in the 7 or 8 years since I've kind of been overseeing this data and this presentation, I'm finally proud to say that 6% has almost matched 3% as the most common default deferral percentages. So slowly but surely, plan sponsors are getting the message that starting somebody at 3% is not going to get them to save enough to sustain what could be a 25 or 35-year retirement. In our experience, vast majority of plan sponsors are utilizing a target date solution for the default investment type. And you see on the right-hand side there, 96% of participants stay enrolled, and most of those either stay at the default rate or actually even increase their deferral rate as well. So it's good to see that the default deferral percentage slowly starting to inch up from 3% into 4, 5, and 6, and so forth. Auto increase is the other one that we would advocate you use in conjunction with auto enrollment. And again, similar, if you look on the right-hand side, you see that the contribution percentage cap, and now 20% is the most common contribution cap, with 10% coming in at second place. So that, again, good news that plan sponsors are getting the message that plan sponsors aren't starting folks out at 1% or 3% and capping them at 6. They're now starting them at 3 or 6%, capping them at 10 or even 20. So good news there. And then you can see the bullet on the left-hand side. When auto increase is used as an opt-out service, about 2/3 of participants remain in that program. So again, they are allowing their deferrals to gradually be increased over time. So auto boost is maybe one that you have not heard before, whereas auto increase is a gradual step up of contributions over time. Auto boost is a one-time increase of a population's deferral percentage. What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you're looking at everybody in the plan who's contributing, say, 1 to 5%. And you can say, you know what, as of April 1st, unless they opt out, we're going to bump or boost everybody up to 6%, kind of a new threshold, if you will. And again, unlike auto increase, this is kind of a one-time step up of a specific demographic within the plan. And you see 83% of participants allow themselves to be boosted and either stay at the default rate or increase their deferral. And then there's a couple, 5.7%, decreased their deferral but still kept it greater than 0. One that I'll spend a little bit of time on is re-enrollment. And for a couple of reasons here. You think of retirement benefits as just a part of an employee's total compensation plan or part of all of these other employee benefits. But a lot of times we treat the retirement plan differently than every other employee benefit, meaning we treat it as kind of a point-in-time benefit, whereas somebody will get hired with a company, they'll sit down with somebody in benefits or HR, and the HR person usually will give them an enrollment kit and say, now you have to make a decision about retirement savings when you become eligible. And for a lot of folks, either who are switching jobs or who may have been unemployed or underemployed before obtaining that new job, it might not be feasible for them to put money away for retirement upon their hire date. And yet we treat the retirement plan as this kind of point-in-time benefit. So what re-enrollment does is that it will periodically go back and take everybody who is not participating in the plan and re-enroll them in a certain deferral amount and into, usually it's a qualified default investment alternative like a target date fund or a managed account or something like that. So re-enrollment actually puts the retirement plan on par with all of the other employee benefits, because usually with dental or medical coverage, there's an open enrollment period annually. And so that's kind of what re-enrollment is to the retirement plan, is that it's saying, if you really don't think it's a good decision to participate in the plan, we're going to force you to make that decision on an annual basis. Folks on some of the retirement centered folks at T. Rowe Price, we affectionately refer to this service as auto harass. So that is re-enrollment. And then there's a couple of not so usual suspects on here. You see the top one on this slide, auto restart. This is an automatic restart of contributions after a hardship suspension ends. So usually if someone's taking a hardship, they're in dire financial straits, they're doing it to prevent eviction, paying for post-secondary education, but there's a certain need that they're dipping into their retirement savings. And so you would think that as soon as a hardship suspension ends, folks would probably not want to start their contributions back again right away. And yet, you've got 63% of participants resume deferrals as soon as a hardship suspension ends. So even something as drastic as immediately starting deferrals after a hardship suspension is still benefiting the majority of participants. And then you look in the bottom there, auto rebalance. So most of our clients offer this, and because it's an opt-in service, very few participants actually take us up on it. but essentially auto rebalance systematically allows you to buy low and sell high based on what your account's asset allocation is. But because it's an opt-in service, again, the take-up and the adoption is very, very low. A target date reset program is the last one of the auto services that we'll talk about. So this allows sponsors to move participants' existing balances and future contributions into an age-appropriate target date fund at a certain point in time. I would say the vast majority of times that I have seen plan sponsors utilize a target date reset is upon conversion from one record keeper to another. But if a sponsor is making wholesale changes to their plan, let's say maybe they're freezing a defined benefit plan, they're adding a non-elective contribution or changing the match, making sweeping investment changes, they might also take the opportunity to default everybody into an age-appropriate target date investment. And if you think of it this way, let's say way back in 1990, plan sponsor was very innovative and an early adopter of auto enrollment. But for 20 years, they defaulted everybody into a money market or stable value fund. And then in 2010, they said, you know what, we really should make the default something that's a little bit more age appropriate. Let's switch it up to a target date fund, which is great for new hires going forward. But what about the 20 years of those employees who were defaulted into the stable value or money market fund? Well, something like a target date reset will allow a plan sponsor to go back and move everybody over into a more age-appropriate asset allocation strategy. So again, vast majority of conversions and mergers that T. Rowe Price saw last year took advantage of this strategy, and the assets are very sticky. You have 71% of assets remain in target date funds after 18 months of a target date reset. And then here are just some kind of we believe statements or best practice considerations. We would say that you need to escalate the default, you need to escalate the cap on auto increase, use asset allocation solutions. If you can convince plan sponsors to employ something like re-enrollment or automatically harassing their employees every year to make a decision about their retirement plan. And then use these services in conjunction with each other. Again, auto enrollment is just step one. And we got to make sure that people get in the plan, yes, but we want to make sure that they're elevating their contributions and they're in an age-appropriate asset allocation strategy as well. So let's take a look at participant target date experience. We'll switch gears for a second here. Why do we use them? Do customers actually benefit? And then how can we optimize that experience? I think we know why we use them. As Brian said earlier, you've got inertia that reigns supreme within participant populations. And we actually went back and back-tested some statistics, for example, from the financial crisis. We looked at all target date investors and all folks who are self-directed investors, so did not have any target date assets in their account. And target date investors were 4 times less likely to sell out at the trough or make a trade at the trough. So, and that speaks to that first bullet there. They're more likely to maintain their age-appropriate equity exposure during times of heightened volatility. The second bullet on there, self-directed investors gradually reduce their equity exposure over time after age 65, and these charts is a demonstration of that. So these are folks who are 60 years and older, do not have any target date assets, and you can see that it's a gradual wind down of equity over time into their retirement years. And I think that this speaks and touts the benefits of a through glide path approach to target date investing. These folks do not go static at age 65. They gradually prefer to wind down their equity throughout their retirement years. All right, so we asked ourselves, and we were asked some very difficult questions coming out of 2008 and 2009. They said, well, if target date funds are going to garner most of the assets by 2020, we owe it to ourselves to make sure that these investment products are functioning as they should, that participants are actually benefiting from putting their money in there as opposed to selecting their own investments. And so a lot of the critics of the retirement industry or target date funds asked some very pointed questions in 2009 and 2010. they said things like participants don't understand what the date means, they're not using them correctly, they're mixing and matching them with other investments in the menu. So we went back and we took a look at all that data to see if those criticisms were founded, and if so, what can we do about it? So the first thing we did was say, well, how widely used are target date funds? And we looked at our book of business. Some of these statistics are pulled. T. Rowe Price has a record-keeping book of business with about 1.9 million participants. So, and these statistics are pulled from that participant population. So we said, all right, well, they're very widely used. 79% of participants who have access to target date funds are using them. So then the second one was, yeah, but they're mixing and matching with, there are 10 different target dates available. They're putting 10% in all of them. And we said, well, you know what? Actually, 95% of target date users are only using one target date fund. So at least they're using them in that respect correctly. They said, yeah, but they don't know what the date means. All right. And they said, if somebody's going to retire in 2010, they might have all their money in the target date 2060 fund. And we said, well, you know what? Actually, 98% of folks are using the age-appropriate target date fund. So then the critics would say, yeah, but they're mixing and matching them with standalone investments in the plan. So we went back, took a look at our book of business. We said, actually, 79% of participants have most or all of their assets in target date funds. So these are questions that certainly I think needed to be asked coming out of 2008 and 2009, but these are questions that we consistently and continuously ask ourselves as a target date provider to make sure that participants understand what they're investing in, that they're using them properly, and that they're benefiting from the professional oversight. And then optimizing the effectiveness and the impact. Use target dates as the QDIA. You can use a target date reset strategy that allows you at a plan level to optimize the asset allocation of the participants. And then I think the third bullet on here is kind of a no-brainer. It's that you want information to be available regardless of how the participants choose to digest it, so that the same thing they're getting in the mail in a statement is the same thing they're reading on the website, is the same thing they're getting in an email, it's the same thing that might be on their benefits section of their intranet, it's the same thing they're going to hear in a one-on-one or group meeting, it's the same thing that they're going to hear from call center representatives as well. So make sure that it's multi-channeled and the message is consistent. All right, 2 down, 1 to go. So we talked about auto features, we talked about target date funds. Let's talk about demographic shifts that are occurring within the landscape. As I said earlier, I used the barbell analogy. You've got these 2 huge populations, one that's on the pre-retiree side, one that's just kind of finding their own in the workforce. That's affecting how we as financial professionals are creating plans, trying to engage and influence and motivate these different demographics to save adequately for retirement. And you think of everything that's gone on in the retirement space since the inception of the 401k, everything on here has been done to cater to the savings habits and preferences of the baby boomers, because they're the ones who have had most of their working career from 1981 through the end of last year. I mean, all of a sudden in 2011, retirement income became the most popular topic and thing that we had to solve because the first baby boomers hit age 65 in 2011. And you see how much time and effort and money has been spent trying to kind of, quote unquote, solve the retirement income dilemma since then, because you've got 76 million folks that are going to need some systematic way to draw down their assets over time. But the point here is that millennials behave, they save, they invest. Quite frankly, they think of all of us very differently than the boomers did. And so in order for us to be successful, run successful businesses, and in order for us to be successful in helping our clients, it's going to require a change in strategy and tactics on our part. Because what we've done for the past 30 years can't be what we're going to do for the next 30 in trying to help millennials and even generations after them save for retirement. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare and contrast these 2 demographics. boomers versus millennials, sometimes I'll get the question, why don't you talk about Gen X? As a Gen Xer, I think we should, but they're not as populous. And a lot of sociological studies have been done that show the older Gen Xers behave like boomers and the younger Gen Xers behave like millennials. It's called a transitional generation. So for the sake of being able to identify trends and compare and contrast, that's the reason we do the boomers versus the millennials. So we take a look at who they are as people, how they use technology, who they are as employees. This is a workplace retirement account, and the behavior at work will have direct influence over how well they save through these programs. So if you think of the top left quadrant there, you think of the more traditional life and career path of a baby boomer, where they graduate school at 21 or 22, and they settle down, they start a family, they embark on a career. Even the phrase embarking on a career is kind of becoming extinct in a certain way. And when they graduated school, their parents sat them down on the edge of the bed and said something like, all right, it's time to get serious. It's time to go out there in the world and make something of yourself. And it was a little bit more of a traditional life and career path. And you compare that, and by the way, here, just a disclaimer, I am generalizing. It is not my intent to offend any baby boomers or any millennials that we may have on the call today, but just talking about these two demographics in sweeping generalities. So if you compare that to the life and career path of a millennial, where they still graduated school 21 or 22, but then over a quarter of them are going back for an advanced degree. And we talk about things like financial wellness or the ability to manage debt or manage a budget. Over a quarter of the population going back and acquiring grad school or post-secondary education expenses, that has, again, a very dramatic impact on how good of a retirement saver they can be. Now, when they graduated, their parents didn't sit them down on the edge of the bed and say something like, it's time to go get your act together. They said, hey, take some time off and figure out what you want to do. We want to make sure that you don't rush into anything, that the jobs that you go for align with your skill set and your personality. Another easy way to kind of think of that difference is when the boomers were growing up, only the best got trophies. You had to be the best. You had to win the championship. You had to get the MVP. Now everybody gets a trophy just for participating. A little bit of a sense of entitlement there. We have a colleague here who's got 3 sons under the age of 10, and every time they finish a sports season, he tucks them into bed at night with their participation trophy and says, I hope you get a good night's sleep with this, because tomorrow morning it's going to go in the trash can. So this guy was a walk-on defensive back at Colgate University, so he's slightly competitive, but participation trophies do not stand in his household. You also think 84% of boomers in a recent survey said, I plan to stay with my current employer until I retire. And you've got 91% of millennials who say, I plan to stay with my current employer less than 3 years. When you're talking about saving consistently over time through a workplace retirement plan, and you're switching jobs that frequently, that has serious negative implications on their ability to save enough. And I'll give you an example here. We just talked about auto enrollment, auto increases kind of being best practices. Well, let's say all the employers of a particular millennial use automatic enrollment and automatic increase. And so let's follow the career of an example millennial here, where they get a job at 24 and they get automatically enrolled at 3%. And the next year they go to 4%. The next year they go to 5%. The next year they go to 6%. Then they switch jobs. They get automatically enrolled at 3%. Then they go to 4%. Then they go to 5%. Then they switch jobs. So even with something like auto enrollment and auto increase, in a way we're doing that millennial a disservice, because the defaults are not where they should be. And unless they proactively engage with that retirement plan, they're never going to get to the 10 or 15% savings levels that I think all agree folks need to save in order to sustain a 30-year retirement, or replace 50 or 75% of their pre-retiree income. So for technology, the bottom row on here, I don't think that there's too much to glean that you haven't already heard probably in the media. The phrase I like to use is that baby boomers are digital immigrants, where they had to learn to use the technology, and millennials are digital natives, where they don't know any other way. About a year ago, I bought a new flat screen TV for our family room, and my 4-year-old at the time went up to it and immediately started swiping the screen because that's all that she knew about playing with an iPad. I said, no, it's not quite how TVs work yet. So difference in attitude and behaviors from baby boomers to millennials. There is no better chart I've seen to demonstrate the difference in investment experiences between the two demographics. You, again, look from 1981 to about 1996. This is the S&P month-end returns over that time frame. And you see it was relatively slow and steady wins the race. And then from about 1996 on, it's boom and bust. And the first millennials came of age right around 2001. Okay, and you see what that experience has been. And a great analogy that I use to describe this is like the fingerprint on the brain analogy, where everything that a child goes through from about ages 3 to 10 leaves a little fingerprint on their brain and helps shape how they view the world and their perspective on life as they grow into adolescence and adults. So every experience they have with family and friends and vacations and school and sports and you name it, leaves a little lasting fingerprint on their brain and helps shape their kind of worldview, if you will. Now, the same is true for the first 7 to 10 years of an investor's life. And you look at from about 2001, when millennials started graduating high school, and look at all of the investment fingerprints that have been left on the brains of millennials. When you've got the end of a dot-com bubble, and 9/11 and Enron and WorldCom and Bernie Madoff and a housing crisis and Brexit, you've got all of these little investment fingerprints. And it tends to foster a lot of risk aversion with a younger audience. For the folks that are not invested, into an asset allocation solution like a target date fund, they are very, very risk averse. In fact, I've looked over the past 5 years, we've looked at young participants ages 20 to 34 who have most or all of their account in a stable value in a money market fund. These are participants that have no target date assets. So these are folks investing on their own. Over 1 in 4 has all of their money in a money market or a stable value fund. And it's because of these investment fingerprints. So really quick, let's talk about what we can learn from these generational differences. We talked about frequent job changes, suggest the need for plans with immediate eligibility and auto-enrollment. We can also put something like escalated defaults on there. As we went through that example earlier, even with something like auto-enrollment, if a participant's not proactively engaged, they're not going to be able to elevate their savings rates enough. Provide younger participants with the opportunity to delegate or validate investment decisions. And validate's the key word there, because financial information isn't confined to a classroom or an enrollment kit or a call center anymore. Anybody can bring up as much financial information as they want to on their phone or their tablet or something like that. So it's not that millennials don't have access to the information. It's almost that they have too much information at their fingertips, and they need help from all of us to figure out what pertains to them, to take this mountain of information and distill it down into something that is pertinent to them. And I liken it to an online shopping experience, where if I go on Amazon, I can research 2 different products, and Amazon gives me as much information as I possibly want to know about the manufacturer, the shipping, the cost, services, product features, benefits, you name it. But before I hit purchase on one of those 2 items, I'm going to do something every single time, and that's going to be to validate my decision with an expert, with everybody who's already bought it. I'm going to read the peer reviews, and then validate the decision I'm about to make. And so it's very similar to participants, young participants. It's not that they lack the information. We just need to point them kind of in the right direction as to what pertains to them. The third and fourth bullet points are kind of go in tandem. So I think if you guys have heard the phrase financial wellness, is probably the hottest topic in the industry today. And it's all about holistic education. Again, you've got these two huge demographics where the baby boomers need a lot of unique help. Pre-retiree strategy, tax strategy, retirement income help. It could be estate planning. All of those topics go above and beyond traditional 401k education. Same thing with millennials. Saving, spending, debt management, budgeting. Older millennials are about 34, 35 right now, so they might need college savings help for young kids. And all of those topics go above and beyond traditional 401k education. And so to some respect, these demographic trends have birthed this notion or this heightened need for holistic education, which we've dubbed financial wellness. And you think, again, taking a step back, looking historically at the industry, from about 1980 to 1990, when defined benefit plans and pension plans started to ramp down and the burden of retirement savings transitioned squarely to the shoulders of your average American worker, we said, well, if we just give them a bunch of education, they'll read about it and they'll make a better decision. And then in the early 1990s, we looked and said, well, that didn't work. We said, well, a couple of smart behavioral economists and behavioral finance folks came along and said, well, let's use inertia to our advantage and we'll default everybody. Auto services. And then that worked to a large extent, but there's still a lot of folks who either aren't covered by auto services, the plan sponsor might be philosophically opposed to it, it's cost prohibitive. So now we're going back and saying, let's get Americans' financial house in order. Let's help them with managing their day-to-day finances while setting short and long-term savings goals. And that's why this need and attention is being put on holistic financial topics. And then really quickly, the last one on here, gamifying the experience. So gamification seems a little bit innovative for the retirement space. And not a lot of folks maybe have heard of gamification, but not necessarily playing a game. It's just the ability to tap into everybody's innate desire to compete. Any of you out there wear a Fitbit or some sort of activity tracker, that is the gamification of your physical fitness on a daily basis. The old McDonald's or Wendy's Employee of the Month was gamification of fast food worker productivity 40 years ago. So how can we apply this to a retirement construct? If any of you obviously have different working groups, working teams, different geographic locations, an easy way to do this is just to pit them against each other. Who can raise the participation, average participation rate, or who can raise deferral rates, or who can engage with educational content online the most over a 12 or 18-month period? And then you can reward that good behavior. But it's really just tapping into everybody's innate desire to compete. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Brian. I don't know if we've had questions coming in, but I'm happy to entertain any of those at this point.
Yeah, great stuff, Patrick. Appreciate all the insights. We have had a couple questions come in. If you haven't entered yours already, please do so in the question panel on the GoToWebinar dashboard there. But a couple of things, Patrick. One, I mean, in general, all of this stuff sounds like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you implement auto features and map into target date funds? Are there any pitfalls that people should be aware of or things to consider before implementing some of the strategies that you talked about? Perhaps one thing with a transient workforce, if you are making eligibility immediate and auto-enrolling someone and they're leaving in a year and they continue to do that time and again, do they end up with kind of lost balances all over the place? Maybe a couple of bullet points on things to consider when looking to implement. We'll start with that.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that we as industry professionals, we want to see these clients succeed. We want successful plans that are improving outcomes. We want to see participants saving enough, but it doesn't make sense for everybody. I've spoken with a number of retail organizations, temp agencies. They say, you know what, retirement plan that I offer is a completely check the box benefit, where the average tenure of my workforce is 180 days. No one has ever retired from it. So I think before we kind of go guns blazing into some of these best practices and say you've got to do auto enrollment, you've got to do auto increase, I think a key question that we all should ask plan sponsors is why are you offering a retirement plan in the first place? And if it is coming from a place of I want to be as paternalistic as possible, I want to set my employees up with the best possible chance of success, then I think you can start to explore some of these best practices in auto services and so forth. So I think it's often overlooked because we're financial professionals. We want to go straight to the data, the analysis, the numbers. But I think philosophically, does it make sense? Does it align with the corporate culture? And then if those answers are yes, you can say, okay, well, let's take a look at some of the cost implications of it as well. What's it going to do in company match, or is there a way that we can stretch the match, or get creative with plan design, with match eligibility, with vesting schedules and so forth, where it's not a huge burden in additional expense. And I know that you guys can run projections on the impact that auto services can have for plan sponsors and their participants, which I think is something else that you can certainly explore.
Yeah, good point. So philosophically, do they make sense? And then cost-wise, hard to ignore that, but there are some creative ways to make that impact minimal. All right, good stuff. As far as also related to the more transient workforce, you indicated that perhaps defaulting someone in the plan at 3% and then continuing to do that over that person's career, if they're asleep at the wheel the whole time, isn't going to get them retirement ready. Would you, I haven't really seen this in practice. I heard people talking about it, but are you kind of advocating for maybe age-based default? So as someone gets closer to retire, either age-based or salary-based defaults that escalate as someone's older and making more money. How have you seen folks addressing that issue?
Yeah, that is one of the things that I think we're kind of on the forefront of, or that's going to be kind of the next big thing. We've been exploring and doing a lot of work around like a savings hierarchy, where and I haven't seen it, like to your point, in practice, because there are testing issues and you've got to stick within ERISA guidelines and all the rules and regs. But let's say, for example, with millennials who are really burdened with student debt, can you maybe set up a savings hierarchy in the plan where the company match maybe goes to pay down debt until they're 25 or 30, and then the company match can go and fund retirement, and then when they get up to a certain age, maybe it's like 50 or 55, and their priorities change, can contributions then get directed somewhere else? There's a couple different services out there, and Double Net Pay is one of them, that provide financial service firms with, for lack of a better phrase, the pipes to set up a hierarchy. So if I went in there, I could say, I have $2,000 every paycheck. I want $500 to go to retirement. I need $500 to go to bills. I need $500 to go to mortgage. And the rest I want to put in savings or checking account and or retirement. And I think that's going to be, it's kind of building on the whole notion of financial wellness, but you're able to kind of automatically set up this hierarchy based on each individual participant's priorities. And assuming that you can get around it somehow with testing and that would be, I think, an innovation that's coming down the pike.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, and all kind of tangentially related to the holistic financial wellness concept, so you find out more about the big picture and prioritize and direct employer contributions from there, and even employee. Makes sense. Last one for you, Patrick. Have you seen kind of pushback on related to auto enrollment and escalation, just annual notice being too burdensome for clients to implement? Is that often a kind of an objection, if you will, to using some of these features?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. I think the main objections to auto enrollment or auto increase, cost prohibitive because of company match, and there are certain creative and innovative things you can do with plan design to help alleviate that cost burden. Some of it, like you said, depending on the workforce, it could be administratively burdensome. So if you don't have automatic data feeds going back and forth between payroll or HR, the service providers, and let's say you happen to miss somebody that should have been picked up in an auto enrollment sweep, something like that, and then you've got to go back and make them whole. So it's usually a cost, philosophical, or administrative burden are the hurdles that we usually see from plan sponsors.
Okay. Well, and shameless plug for Epic, we certainly can handle that notice fulfillment. If that's the objection, let us know. We can help with that. But thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it very much, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. There are a couple of handouts from T. Rowe that are attached on the dashboard there. Feel free to download those if you want to take a look. And we appreciate everyone's partnership and look forward to seeing you on a future session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.